The main character is called Yu Shonen. She is a beautiful, modest girl who works as an ordinary office worker. Day by day, she strives to live her life to the fullest, enjoying every moment. But one day, while she was coming home from work and was entering a pedestrian crossing, a huge truck hit her. Somehow she woke up and realized she had read an extra chapter of an online novel she had read the day before. At this moment, the main character is kissing a guy with white hair. When they were finished, Yu Shonen looks at the man and was stunned to see that it was Prince Albert Grey. At this moment, memories of the story started to come back to her mind, and she remembered that her character in the story was a simple servant. She was also in a state of shock and did not realize what she had just done to the prince. Prince Albert Grey is a distinguished-looking man who has very good sword skills, even surpassing swordmasters. With such character, he was able to win the love of all the people. But the king envied the prince and hated him. Albert was not the king's own son, and the king, who is called Rustrade, was a mean one. However, the fact that he could not be Albert's father was common knowledge publicly and was not even hidden. The king suffers from a feeling of inferiority and chooses a successor who seems worthless. Albert Grey, who lost his biological parents, is only a helpless orphan. Naturally, the king could not imagine Albert would have a bright future in which everyone would love him. So the king, whose mind was clouded by hatred and envy of his son, slandered the prince and imprisoned him in a tower. In the tower, on which 30 of the magicians had cast a sealing spell, Albert was therefore abandoned, and his solitude was only shared by his servant, who was also confined in the hotel tower. Plus, the king wanted to perfectly break the prince, so he chose Albert's servant, who was crazy about him, and this servant turned out to be the protagonist. Furthermore, the king even gave this girl a magic wand with which she could do whatever she wanted. The wand is a tool that allows you to control Albert's body. It is also the key which allows entry into the tower. Albert, therefore, could not even leave or enter the kitchen without the permission of the servant, and the whole life of the prince was in her hands. First of all, light hugs, then kisses, and more. The servant did everything to disturb the prince's head. But the prince was not fooled. After skillfully seducing the girl, he managed to obtain the power of the wand, and a year after his imprisonment, Albert escaped from this tower. Also, during all the years he was imprisoned in this tower, he hid his hatred for this servant, in order to get the staff, and the first thing he did when he left the tower was to take care of the servant. Like that, without a sound, the servant died a miserable death worthy of a worthless demon. By observing the prince, the protagonist Yu Shonen understood that the worthless villain was obvious and that she had taken Rose's body. At that time, Albert was trying to seduce the girl by asking her if she wanted more kisses. Rose tried to distance herself from him by saying that she thought it was a good place to stop, and she did not understand how she could have moved. At the precise moment when she showed the wand to the prince, approaching the young girl, the prince asks her to show him her magic wand, but the young girl realizes that she can't give it away like that. However, under the pressure of this handsome man she has feelings for, that she can't get rid of. Thinking that her heart would stop before her head falls from his shoulders, she decided to give the wand to the prince. While watching Albert use the power of this wand, she realized that she had barely entered this body, and that she was already tempting fate. After some time spent in her room, the protagonist tried to calm down and thought about the fact that she had changed bodies. But if she keeps her cool, she can do it. Besides, Albert has a claim to the throne, and staying near him is like playing the lottery. She decided to make a pact with him, namely that she would not take his stick away from him, but on the contrary, she would give it to him and offer to unite in exchange for which she would ask him for guarantees that he would keep his life and would ensure her a safe old age. Fortunately, the prince's imprisonment did not last more than a week, which means that it is not too late to change their relationship. By going down, she saw the prince, who immediately asked the maid if she wanted something else to eat, to which the girl replied that she didn't need anything. And looking at the guy's smile, she remembered that it was a predatory smile that she should be wary of. Touching her lips with her hand, the prince thought that the maids just didn't kiss him because he thought he was very good at it. Rosa started to feel strange and blushing, told the prince to do what he shouldn't do. That left the prince a little perplexed, and he wondered why the girl had come down and what she wanted to talk to him about. At that moment, Rosa took out a contract and immediately placed it on the table, saying that she wanted to make a deal with Albert. Upon hearing this, Albert understood that the servant probably wanted something in exchange for her body, which surprised the young girl a little, since in the case she came quickly to bed, but in this case, he would have to deal with her quickly. So she waved her hands and said that she was not going to share the lead. Albert, smiling his hunter's smile in the face of the blushing heroine, declared that he knew perfectly well that she liked him. At that time, Rosa thought that she was not the servant the prince used to live with but a completely different person, and that she had no feelings for him. But what if she said that to the prince? He would think she was crazy. Besides, all she wants for now is to get out of this tower as quickly as possible. The protagonist, therefore, asked the prince to take a look at the treaty. While looking at this document, the prince was a little surprised because the young girl wanted to be assured that he would keep her alive and provide her with a peaceful old life. The young girl also declared with confidence that she wanted more than anyone to get Albert out of this tower, and that she therefore wanted to help him get out of it. She added that the prince would only have to give her enough money so that she could live in a village, eat good food, and enjoy life more. Rosa asked Albert to read this contract until the end because there was a clause guaranteeing that there would be no touching without the consent of both parties. At that time, Albert was completely baffled. He listened to the protagonist say that the moment they kissed, she understood that she was hurting the prince. She realized that she was getting closer to her deathbed, which surprised the prince a little. She explained to him that she thought that perhaps he could escape one day. Albert was perplexed. He did not understand what the servant was talking about and what a simple kiss had to do with the fact that she could not survive. Then he got up, approached the servant, and began to tenderly touch her face, saying that he had loved her from their first meeting. At that time, Rosa tried to calm down because she realized that the prince was simply trying to seduce her. The prince also asked the girl to approach him, but she did not understand why she had to do it, and she asked if he was going to kiss her again. She realized that this was an important moment to gain the prince's trust. Hearing this, the prince replied that he certainly wanted to kiss her and asked the girl if she didn't see any problem. The young girl replied that it's not that she doesn't care, but that she realizes that he's going to do it because he trusts her, and all he wants is to see if she reacts to this kiss the same way as before. Albert was a little surprised to hear this and said that he doesn't know what happened to Rose, but that it's as if she had become another person, to which the young girl replied that some people change before their eyes, and that this can happen. Albert agreed with the young girl, immediately grabbing her by the waist and looking straight into her eyes, telling her that the maids were right. However, he hadn't examined it yet, and he should do another experiment, and if Rosa doesn't want to do it, she should just say so. The heroes then fell on the bed and started kissing passionately, but the protagonist was completely baffled and wanted it to end as quickly as possible. After a while, they finished kissing, and Rosa remained lying on the bed, completely baffled, happy that it was finally over. At that point, Albert asked the girl if he could take another look at the contract, to which the girl immediately agreed. The prince wondered how he could be sure that the servant would respect the terms of the contract. The girl who showed him the contract asked him to just sign it with magic. Upon hearing that, Albert was a little surprised and didn't understand how the girl could have known that he had magical powers. Since the protagonist read the novel, she knows that Albert keeps in his plan the fact that he can use magical powers, but that he has not told anyone about it. Smiling, she replied that she was only guessing, and she explained to the prince that if he wanted to see the stick, it was because he was going to try to dissipate magic. Albert was surprised at the intelligence of the servant, and he didn't even know that she could think of such a thing. At that moment, the prince wondered why the servant had decided to show a magic wand since she did not benefit from it. But the young girl replied with concern that she had just lost her mind in front of his charms. Albert said that unfortunately, his magic does not work here, and that he must therefore study the stick carefully. At that moment, Rosa stood up and approached the prince, realizing that it would be his conscience to respect the terms of the agreement, to which the prince replied that if he had confidence in her, he would have accepted. At that moment, the young girl began to tremble a little, but she knew that she should not give in to fear. So she explained to the prince that she had done everything in her power to know how to write a mutually advantageous treaty, and she even passed the kiss test. The young girl, therefore, does not understand why Albert does not believe her, and if it continues like this, it will be even worse for him. The servant started to tell the prince that they were now in the same situation as they were both imprisoned in, but the girl was willing to accept any conditions if the prince gave her what she wanted. Rosa only needs 3 things. Firstly, the guarantee that she will be kept alive when she is released from the tower. Secondly, money to be able to live the rest of her life properly and not depend on anyone. And thirdly, immunity, since she cannot touch Albert, Albert must not touch her without her permission. So the girl offers these conditions to the prince because she knows he can respect them, and of course, they will both pay for breaking them, and they will have to determine the appropriate punishment. The protagonist, therefore, did not delay in responding, when, as punishment, he should pay with their lives, those who somewhat surprised him. She said that this way he would be sure to honor all the terms of the contract. Albert, therefore, asks the servant to fetch a quill. At the end, for some time, with a pen in his hand, Albert asked the young girl if she would not regret it too because it seemed to him that he did not like her body, to which the young girl replied in a calm voice that she thought that all passion was less important than fear for her life. Then the protagonist said that they finally managed to sign this pact together, said that she hopes they can get along for the rest of their time imprisoned in the tower, where the prince bows to the girl and tells her that he is also counting on her. The next day, the protagonist goes to his usual activities of good, that is to say, that in accordance with the contract concluded yesterday, Albert is now a very powerful employer, which is why she is not facing imminent death after her release from this tower. Plus, Albert has promised to give her enough money so she can live until the end of days. But until the plan is put into action, you have to take care of your client. Besides, the prince should not underestimate an office worker who has traveled a lot, and therefore she also knows the plot of this novel. However, Rose realized that she had forgotten a very important detail, namely, Calbert, and she was now like roommates. This morning, coming out of her room, she immediately saw the wet prince, who apologized for being a little late because of fencing practice. After seeing this handsome man, the main character started to go crazy on him. I don't understand why he walks around like that in the morning. No matter, he is a prince. He is not alone in this tower, and they certainly live there together. The main heroines do not understand how he was able to get out of here. To which the man replies that it is thanks to the fact that the servant gave him yesterday to study the stick. The guy touched Pink's soft hair, thanked her, and told her that he was now free to do whatever he wanted on the second floor. The protagonist replies that she didn't do anything like that, but she immediately turns away because she can't stand looking at the prince and simply asks him to get dressed at least. Finally dressed, Albert asked if everything was okay, to which the protagonist replied that now she liked everything and that he finally had the well-groomed look, and the maid asked the prince to always wait for her that way, adding something necessary. Turning away, the girl didn't know whether to call them roommates or roommates, since I was going to have to live with a stranger she knew through an online novel. While thinking, she realized that whatever Albert's abilities, it would take time for him to undo the magic of the wand in the tower. Observing the prince with a displeased expression, the young girl comes to the conclusion that in order to avoid any future problems, she should steer clear of confronting Albert. Her goal is to ensure that he feels comfortable living together. So, she decides to have a conversation with him, expressing her desire to know his preferences. Albert is a bit surprised by this request, considering they just signed a contract and the maid already knew the terms. Rose bursts into laughter upon hearing his confusion, as all she wanted to know was his favorite food. She wonders what he must be thinking, assuming she was violating the terms of their agreement. The servant also informs Albert that they will be staying together for a day or two, and only she will have access to the kitchen, so there's no need for him to disclose his food preferences. Upon hearing this, Albert responds that he doesn't have any specific food preferences and gives Rose the freedom to cook anything she likes, which brings her great joy. She excitedly announces that tonight's menu will be Korean cuisine, her personal favorite. The fact that the protagonist is familiar with this cuisine is because the world they are in is a fictionalized version created by the author of the novel. Furthermore, the main character recalls that in her previous life, when she read this novel, she couldn't comprehend how Korean food could be part of a stylized European romantic fantasy. As she glances at her phone, the girl can't help but wonder why there are so many ingredients listed. However, she realizes that most of these ingredients are related to the main character, who hails from South Korea and prepares Korean dishes using them. This skill has won her the hearts of many people. During the time when rumors about Koina were spreading, Albert took an interest in her culinary research. And that's where the protagonist's story in the novel ends. Rose is filled with curiosity about what will happen next. While knocking on a door, the girl ponders the fact that Koina cooks Korean dishes in this novel, which means Albert might develop a fondness for them. However, it was not her primary concern at the present moment. The door to the tower was finally opened by the knights who were guarding it, their curiosity piqued as to what had transpired. Rose, who was filled with worry, responded, "We will address the critics on Monday morning." Every week, the servant would provide a report to the king. detailing how she had mistreated Albert and the extent of his suffering. Simultaneously, the king would send his patrolmen to assist her and provide her with all the necessary resources. Passing the report to a knight, the protagonist felt relieved that the real Rose had already prepared this week's report. If she had written it herself, the king would have become aware of the situation. However, they needed to devise a plan to avoid future harm. She also felt as though she had two bosses, Prince Albert and King Rostratus. Several days later, one of the knights entered the tower carrying crates. He stated that he had brought everything the protagonist had requested the previous week. He also mentioned that if she needed anything else, she should inform him. Upon hearing this, the servant handed a small piece of paper to the knight, requesting additional food as indicated on the note. This surprised the knight slightly, but he quickly understood that these items were necessary for the servants to torment the prince. She explained that she would prepare some for him first and then provide him with spicy food, ensuring that the prince would always be at her mercy. Albert praised her, and inquires if she truly intended to torture him. Upon hearing this, Rosa denied any intentions of doing that, claiming it was merely a ruse to avoid detection. Indeed, she required a plausible pretext to request such costly ingredients in order to avoid arousing suspicion from the king. Consequently, she had only one option at her disposal: to feign wickedness. Rose, a character featured in numerous romantic fantasy novels, never anticipated that her knowledge would prove useful one day. With a smile, she politely asked the prince to wait a moment as he would soon have the pleasure of tasting the incredibly delectable dish she had prepared. However, Albert appeared unperturbed and expressed his anticipation. He also inquired about the type of cuisine she intended to cook, and in that moment, she truly contemplated harming him. While dining, the prince observed a significant change in the maid's demeanor over the past few weeks. Previously, she had solely focused on her physical appearance, but now she displayed great effort in cooking and seemed like an entirely different person. Hearing this, the protagonist reminded the prince of her previous statements, particularly during their first kiss. She acknowledged the foolishness of her past actions and emphasized the need for an agreement. She believed that sudden changes in people always had a reason behind them. Rosa then realized that Albert still harbored distrust towards her, but it didn't bother her much. She knew it would take time to prove that she had transformed into a completely different person from the old maid. Moreover, she had other matters occupying her thoughts at present. Abruptly rising from her seat, the young girl, eager to expedite matters, informed the Duke that she had something to disclose and had previously requested him not to fall in love with her. The protagonist recognized the existence of an outdated pattern in romantic fantasy, where a girl entangled in a romantic plot inevitably encounters the protagonist and eventually falls in love with them, a cliché. However, Rosa desired to prevent any romantic feelings from developing between herself and Albert, as love with this cold-hearted man could potentially result in tragedy. When Albert was 8 years old, they attempted to poison him for the first time. Born into a family with a fairy-tale-like background, connected by blood to the royal house, but this family's nobility was merely a facade and their financial situation had significantly deteriorated. Little Albert was peacefully enjoying his meal when suddenly he started feeling unwell, catching the attention of his brothers who rushed to his side. Concerned, they asked him who could have done this to him, while miraculously, the young prince began to recover. However, tragedy struck as his older brothers, consumed by their fight for inheritance, ended up ending each other. Albert's parents also succumbed to their illnesses, unable to cope. Albert had hoped for a better life after being adopted by King Rostratus, but reality proved to be far from sweet as he found himself imprisoned in a tower with a deranged maid, losing his place in society. Rosa, on the other hand, pondered whether someone who had lost faith in themselves could truly love another person. She found parallels between her own life and Albert's, having tragically lost her life shortly after graduating from college in a car accident. The young girl hadn't even had the chance to properly grieve, although it was undoubtedly difficult. In front of others, she put on a brave face, pretending that everything was all right. But when she was alone, she made even greater efforts to escape the harsh reality, often finding solace in novels. In a strange twist of fate, she found herself in a situation where she surprisingly adapted quickly, but embarking on a romantic relationship with Albert was an entirely different matter. Eventually, the young girl came to the realization that they would only bring harm to each other. She mustered the courage to ask Albert to promise her that he would never fall in love with her. She explained that her fears might be unfounded, but being confined within the four walls of their shared space, she urged caution. In that moment, Albert calmly reassured Rosa, assuring her that there was no need to worry. He promised her that he would never fall in love with her. Upon hearing the prince's words, the young girl's heart filled with joy. She was reassured by his statement and hoped that his attitude would remain unchanged. She also reminded him not to forget her reward. In that moment, the prince noticed the girl's elation, but the servant clarified that she was simply excited to finally be free from this place. She desired to explore, engage in conversations, savor delicious food, and meet a kind and successful man. Furthermore, she expressed her willingness to endure all of this if she had access to a phone and the internet. This led her to inquire about the prince's plans for their escape, leaving him slightly perplexed. He assured her that leaving was not a problem, as he had already weakened the sealing spell with his wand. The girl was astonished upon hearing this, unable to comprehend how he had managed to weaken the spell. Overwhelmed with joy, she praised him as a true genius. As they neared their escape from isolation, the prince informed her that it would take at least 3 months, which greatly surprised the young girl. She couldn't fathom why it would take such a long time. Albert believed that leaving immediately would give the king a reason to take action. In the novel, Albert had only managed to escape after a year, enduring countless challenges during that time. Once the prince finally maximizes his powers, he is able to address his men and expand his influence. During their conversation, Albert expressed his belief that being imprisoned in the tower presented an opportunity for him to instigate change. He emphasized the need for caution and a gradual approach in order to bring about the downfall of the king. Albert also requested the maid to be patient, acknowledging the difficulty of her situation but emphasizing the importance of giving him the necessary time. In response, Rose smiled and assured Albert that she understood his perspective. She reassured him that she was willing to wait for the right moment, while also granting him the freedom to do as he pleased in the meantime. Rose mentioned that time seemed to pass quickly in the tower, yet she hadn't had the chance to escape with Albert. Additionally, she mentioned that it was time to enjoy the meal they had been eagerly anticipating after successfully sending reports to the king and receiving the requested food. Rose expressed her delight at the prospect of finally being able to savor this dish, as cooking with unfamiliar ingredients had been a challenging task for her. This prompted her decision to prepare an unforgettable meal that would help alleviate the stress of their confinement in the tower. After some time, Rose successfully cooked the ojinjiobakium, which emitted a delightful aroma. However, she suddenly realized that she had forgotten to add boiled eggs as a delicious topping. Recognizing the importance of this addition, she immediately called Albert to seek his opinion on whether he would enjoy such a dish. Albert, feeling a bit perplexed, expressed his confusion about the dish. In response, Rose assured him that it was one of his favorites and that she had prepared something new for him that day. Albert also noticed a newfound confidence in Rose, contrasting her usual gloomy demeanor when serving meals. Rose admitted her lack of experience in cooking but couldn't comprehend how she had managed to prepare the dish so well. Even though she had no idea what type of food it was, when Albert laid eyes on the dish, he was taken aback. It was the first time he had ever seen such a vibrant red dish in his entire life. Curious yet cautious, he asked their servant to taste it first. The girl happily agreed, mentioning how she had been craving Korean food for a while and missed it dearly. As she took a bite, she was overwhelmed by the incredible flavor and couldn't help but shed tears of joy. She excitedly told Albert that it was absolutely delicious and she was amazed that she had managed to create such a tasty dish. Surprisingly, after savoring the food, she felt all her stress melt away, which intrigued the prince. Rosa explained that she always felt stressed in her usual surroundings, and during those moments, she would turn to spicy food. Ojinjiobakium, a spicy Korean dish, was her favorite, but she hadn't had it in a long time, making this experience even more special. Approaching the prince's fork, the servant urged him to trust her and taste the dish since he hadn't had breakfast yet. As Albert took a bite, he couldn't help but squirm a little. The girl misunderstood, thinking he didn't like the dish, but in reality, it was because of its intense spiciness. The prince exclaimed that it was indeed very spicy. Meanwhile, the protagonist observed Albert eating, imagining him with adorable cat ears and finding him incredibly cute. Suddenly, she dropped her head on the table but quickly reassured everyone that she was fine. She assumed that Albert must have enjoyed the dish after all. Perplexed, the prince wondered how the servant knew all this. The girl explained that when the prince was in a good mood, he would smile with the left corner of his lip. Although he didn't understand how he could be in a good mood, the girl speculated that his mouth was probably still burning from the spiciness of the dish. The Duke chimed in, expressing his surprise at how easily Rosa could bring happiness to Albert. The young girl quickly agreed, saying that it wasn't complicated at all and that she's happiest when she's well fed and having a good time. She then turned to Albert and asked how he was feeling, as she noticed that when he had a delicious meal in front of him, he no longer seemed sad or gloomy. Albert responded by saying that he wasn't sure if he was happy, but he definitely felt much better than before. He expressed his happiness at finally being able to share a meal with someone. Late at night, Rosa was peacefully sleeping in her bed when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She couldn't understand why her stomach was hurting, but she immediately thought it might be because she hadn't eaten spicy food in a long time. Based on the symptoms, it seemed like she was suffering from indigestion. There was no medicine or doctor available, so the only option was to endure the pain. Meanwhile, Albert, instead of sleeping, was busy improving his skills by reading books and gaining new knowledge. Suddenly, he heard loud noises and decided to investigate. As he walked through the corridors of the tower, he unexpectedly ran into the main character, who was quite surprised to see him in the middle of the night. She turned around and explained that she was feeling bored and wanted to do some sewing. However, Albert immediately noticed from the expression on the young girl's face that something was amiss, which caught the young girl off guard as she wondered what was wrong with her face. Suddenly, she collapsed to the ground, and her magic wand slipped from her hands. Albert grew concerned for the girl and asked her what was wrong, as she appeared pale and was sweating profusely. He urged her to tell him what had happened. Clutching her stomach and crying, Rosa revealed that she was experiencing severe stomach pain and desperately needed to eat something. Understanding that it was most likely indigestion, the prince promised to help her. In order to assist the young girl, Albert asked her if he could borrow the wand for a moment. In response, the girl mentioned that the wand was somewhere nearby. The main character reassured Albert not to worry. However, the prince unexpectedly grabbed her arm without realizing the potential danger. Roselle explained to him that in her hometown, to cure indigestion, people would prick their fingers with a needle similar to the one she held. And just like that, the issue was resolved. Albert then smiled, acknowledging that the girl was correct and that it was indeed an effective method. After some time, the prince realized that he had learned something new thanks to the girl, and he inquired about her well-being. She responded that she felt much better and requested a towel from the prince to clean the blood. Albert then took the girl's hand and began licking her finger, which greatly surprised her. He explained that this was the method used to stop bleeding in his hometown. From that moment on, the protagonist found it difficult to sleep, all thanks to the prince's unique ability to captivate others.